Hey everyone, it's Russ Altman here, your host of The Future of Everything. We have another best of episode for you today. This one is a conversation I had with Irene Lo about the work she's doing to study and leverage markets, but markets for social impact. Think about markets for public school assignments, where your kid's going to go to school. Or medical school residency matches, where you're going to train to learn how to be a doctor. Irene reminds us that markets exist to help effectively allocate limited resources, and not all marketplaces are based in cash. I hope you'll tune in again to this thought-provoking conversation to hear Irene talk about the changing face of markets. Before we jump into the podcast, I'd like to give you a reminder to rate and review the podcast and also tell your friends about it. It'll help us get better and it'll help us grow. So when we think about markets, we often think about markets where the assets are being exchanged for money. So you think about the grocery market where there's food products laid out, customer selects what they need or want, and they pay typically a fixed price. Some markets you have negotiation, but at a supermarket, you just pay the price and you go on. The rules are clear. The stock market is another market that allows folks to buy and sell shares in companies. In that case, agents make or accept offers for these shares, and the prices go up and down. It's not fixed, based on basically the appetite of the buyers and the appetite of the sellers as well. But there are also important markets in the public and especially nonprofit sector where the assets may not be purely financial. There may be a financial component, but there's still limited resources, and so methods are needed for the fair allocation of these resources. Think about a major city which has a network of public schools that we actually might be talking about, where parents and children have preferences about where they want to attend and what their priorities are when thinking about their schools. Medical centers that train new physicians must prioritize positions in their residency or fellowship programs. You know, the students, the new doctors have their own preferences about geography and their perceived quality of the program. And so there has to be a way to figure out who goes where for the next stage of their training. And then there's even more examples in the developing world, which we may talk about. Farmers producing crops may not have perfect information about how much the crops are worth and what the global demand is. And so they might need help in figuring out how to market their products. So in all of these cases, the public has an interest in fair methods for creating this market for these services and products. Informally, the market, of course, is the combination of the providers of the resource, the consumers of the resource, and the rules by which the resource is transferred from providers to consumers. The creation of these markets often requires economics, game theory, computer science and algorithms, and operations research and logistics. Well, Professor Irene Lo is a professor of management science and engineering at Stanford University. She studies the creation of markets for social good, markets for matching, and markets for assignment, and especially in the public and nonprofit sector, focusing on education, environment, and the developing world. Irene, what are the special challenges of these kinds of markets versus the traditional kind of financial markets?
Yeah, thanks so much, Russ. I think, as you were already mentioning, typically when people think about markets, they think about prices. They think about using money as a means of exchange. And in these kinds of markets, very often there are ethical issues or legal issues or other kinds of issues with using money as a method of exchange. And so you have to figure out, well, how do I learn, how do I obtain information about what people want and how I should be valuing different things in my market if I don't have prices, right? So if I think about school choice, nobody's going to say that you have to pay to go to public school. Right. So how do I figure out which schools you want to go to, which schools are in high demand? We have to use a non-monetary means in order to decide who gets to go where.
So, and I take it that, one of the nice things about financial markets is it boils down to money, which is a single variable that everybody kind of can calibrate to. My guess, although we haven't talked about it, but we will shortly, is that in a lot of the work that you do, it would be like multifactorial. Like there's like geographic, an example of say, residency matching and medical matching is near to my heart because I went through that process myself. And it's, you're thinking about geography and your significant other and the quality of the program. In my case, I I couldn't even decide between two specialties. So I listed both specialties intermixed. And I just said, I'm going to let the match algorithm decide what kind of doctor I'm going to be. And it was a little bit crazy, but that's what I did. So there's a lot of different factors. And it seems to me that that would make it tricky. If you can't boil all those factors into money, then you're looking at trading off perhaps apples and oranges. And am I right about that, or is it not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's that multifaceted aspect, both from the participants in the market and also for the designers in the market. So if I talk about school choice, which is an area where I do research, then from the perspective of parents and families and students, what you were saying makes a lot of sense. Should I think more about how far is the school compared to what programs are available at the school? When does the school start? What after school programs are available? But from the district perspective, there are also lots of different competing factors. So you might think about providing busing for families. Okay, it would be great if everyone is going to a school relatively close to them, because that means that it's much easier to provide busing. And some people may not even need busing, they'll be able to walk to school.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, in cities like San Francisco, where we're currently working with their school district, we see that neighborhoods are often residentially segregated, so racially or socioeconomically segregated. And so another objective a lot of school districts have is to ensure that their schools are diverse, representative of the diversity of the district as a whole. And so then you really have to trade off between, say, letting people go to school close by versus letting people go a little bit further so that you can really disentangle the school populations from the neighborhood populations, which may be more segregated.
Yeah, so you mentioned the school, and let's just dive into it, because I know you've been doing a lot of work, in particular with cities. San Francisco is one, I think maybe with others too. Can you just tell me, how did you connect with them? And then how did you turn a very academic program that you're working on with a very practical problem that they have? So just the story of that meeting, I think, would be very interesting. And then you can tell us how it's set up and what kind of work is going on.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. So I've been working for a couple of years now, as you mentioned, Russ, on the very theoretical mathematical side of school assignment. So if you think about school assignment, there are school seats, there are school children, and you want to let the school children exercise some preference over where they go to school. And so there's this rich, long literature on how should we think about the algorithms that help us do this assignment? How do we think about their economic properties? Will people try to game the system? What do we do when people don't know their preferences, as you were alluding to? And so I've been doing some work myself on this for a couple of years. But with the San Francisco district, what happened was in around 2018, they put out a new resolution that they wanted to redesign their student assignment system. So Professor Itai Ashlagi, who's also an MSME, saw this call, and he said to me, well, we know a little bit about designing school assignment systems. Why don't we go see what their problem is and see if we can help? So we turned up to a few board meetings, started listening in, kind of ascertained that, yes, it would probably be useful for us to be around, and then just introduce ourselves.
So that is super fascinating. So let me just dissect that a little bit. So here's a school board. And as you said, you're doing, well, my words, not yours, super complicated mathematical modeling. How do you make them understand, and how do they learn to trust your algorithms? I'm sure you trust them and you think about them, and your entire career is based on them being, valid and up to, the standards of your field. Tell me how you explain and how you get them on board with these algorithms.
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, in San Francisco, our work was made easier for us because previous researchers had already worked with the district to develop some of their algorithms. And so they were already using things that were informed by research. But what they had done was that they were no longer talking with researchers about these algorithms. So nobody really quite understood how they worked and why things were that way. And so it was actually, I think, they were very grateful that we understood what was going on, and we were able to explain to them So we have, simple infographics, little animations that we used with small examples that make it easier for the board members, for staff at the district to be able to understand what exactly are the mechanics and also the properties of these algorithms.
Do you do dry runs or simulations like before the big day when it's real children getting assigned to real schools? How do you kind of road test your algorithms to make sure there's not a bug or it doesn't do some unforeseen side effect that is not attractive to you or to the board?
Yeah, so with the San Francisco School District, we actually haven't implemented yet the school assignments system that we're proposing. What we've done so far is over the course of about a year and a bit, we jointly with the district developed the proposal for the policy. And this policy was approved, and now we're spending a couple of years implementing the policy.
Gotcha.
And so going back to your question about how do we make sure there are no bugs, well, we've been running thousands and thousands of simulations using, we simulate how people might choose, we predict how they might choose, and then we put them as inputs into the algorithm. So we've been running this thousands of times. And on top of that, I think another interesting question that academics sometimes forget to think about is, well, how does this system feel to the parents, the families that are interacting with the system? Right? We're designing sort of the back end, but it's the back end of this big and complicated socio-technical system. And so what the district is helping us do is community engagement on the policy implementation, and also community engagement to help families understand what this new assignment system is doing.
So I gather that this is very transparent in the sense that you're going to be implementing a policy that is publicly available. Parents can read, the district can read, and you can read. And then it can be held up to people and say, look, we can show that we obeyed this policy in our implementation that you're still working on. Can you tell us what was it about the old systems that required this call for new approaches in 2018 when you and your colleagues, were they unfair or were they just out of date? Did they not work very well?
Yeah. So when the board had the call to redesign the student assignment system, they identified 3 goals. They wanted it to be more predictable, so families had a good sense of where they were going. They wanted it to be more proximate, so families didn't have to travel across the district. And they wanted it to be more diverse, as I mentioned before, representative of the socioeconomic and racial diversity of the district. And so the old system was already designed in the hopes of achieving some of these goals, but unfortunately was not really achieving any of them. And, there were a number of reasons for this. One of them was that it allowed district-wide choice. Anyone could go anywhere, which meant, listing your preferences over 70-something programs and not really knowing your chances of getting into the vast majority of them.
I see.
There were various parts of the design, which in theory, could work well, but just in practice made it very complicated and unpredictable.
And I'm guessing that San Francisco is not the only city that faces these challenges. And is your solution likely to be local to the to the San Francisco concerns? Or is it possible that your algorithms, perhaps with a little bit of tweaking, could be used broadly by other cities around the nation or even the world?
Yeah, so the underlying algorithm, what's called the Gale-Shapley deferred acceptance algorithm, or
that's a mouthful.
There's a lot of names for it. And there's deferred acceptance, which describes what it does. There's Gale-Shapley, which describes the people who came up with it.
Yeah, they like to use their names. So I've noticed this among scientists.
Yes.
But this will be the Lo and Friends algorithm.
We're using some existing algorithms with some tweaks, so no need to put our names on them. But these algorithms are currently being used in quite a lot of districts across the US already. And so what was novel and what we did was putting some restrictions on who could choose what. And so what we did was we took the District of San Francisco and we split it into zones. And we said before you could pick any school in the district, but now you can only pick schools in your zone. And that helps to make things more predictable and also more localized, more proximate. And
the board got the parents and everybody to agree to this, because that sounds like a big deal right there.
Yeah. So the board voted to approve this. It's unclear whether all parents are on board with this. Obviously, nobody likes being told that their choice is being restricted. And so that's why I think this next phase of, a couple of years of intensive community engagement are going to be really key.
Gotcha. This is The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Professor Irene Lo, and we're talking about creating markets where you can fairly allocate. And I know you've worked in many areas. The school example is a great one, and we really could go on entirely on that. But I know you've worked in medical position assignment, and that has a little bit of a different feel. At least the way I remember it, I had my rank list of places that I wanted to study. They had interviewed us, and they had their rank lists of who they thought was best for their program. And then we're trying to keep everybody as happy as possible. And it sounds challenging. So I believe you've worked in that area. And can you tell me about that work and what kind of insights you gained in those situations?
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of work in this area with my postdoc supervisor, Al Roth, who is a Nobel laureate in this and also a professor at Stanford. So I learned a lot just from working with him and seeing the way that he approaches problems. And so in the case of the residency match, where we're matching residents to hospital positions, we were thinking about the problem of, well, it seems like once everyone knows where they want to go, the process there is well standardized, centralized, running pretty smoothly. But it seems like the stage where everyone figures out where they want to go, the interview stage, is very messy, very chaotic.
Yes, so, I can personally testify to that.
Yeah.
Especially when, as a young person, I literally didn't know if I wanted to be a radiologist or a general internist. Mm-hmm. And so I just listed both. And who knows what kind of confusion that could have caused for people trying to figure out what to do with me.
Yeah, and I think another issue that we've heard, I have a lot of friends who are in medical school or are doctors, and they say, they have to really jump on the first interview slots that come out. They have to pay out of pocket to travel to all of these interviews. And so our question was, can we help reduce the interviewing cost and burden on specifically the residents by suggesting interviews instead of everyone just jumping in and trying to snatch up interviews, suggesting, often there are people who are, called the stars of the market, quote unquote, and they obtain a lot of interviews and are very highly sought after, but they essentially have their pick, and it's possible that they would already know earlier on which of these places they're likely to go to. And since hospitals are interview constrained and residents have to pay out of pocket for these interviews, right, maybe by using some of this information, we can reduce the number of interviews that everyone has to be doing while still getting essentially the same final assignment.
But that is super interesting to me, because that means if I understand, you're doing some evaluation of the strength of the candidate in some way and using that information to say, okay, here's where we think it's a good match. And so I can, once again, similar to the schools, I can imagine, that for a resident candidate, that could be a pretty harsh, a little harsh experience, as they learn that at least your algorithm predicts that they are not perhaps the strongest candidate. Is that part of the dynamic? And have you gotten feedback on that, or are we still in the testing stage?
This is very much still in the discussion stage. I think one thing I really learned from Al in market design is that in order to change a market, you need sufficient buy-in from people who decide how the market is run. And so I think we're still really at that stage with this project, and just convincing enough people with enough decision-making authority that this is really an issue and that something needs to be done to change it.
This is The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. We'll have more with Professor Irene Lo next. Welcome back back to the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Professor Irene Lo about resource allocation and market creation and execution. We had a great conversation about the issue of school assignment and a little bit about medical residency. But I know you've also done work in the developing world. And there, I'm sure it's a very complicated scenario. I believe it has to do with farmers and palm oil. But can you give us a setup of what was the challenge for you and your team, and then maybe how things are going and what have been the learnings so far?
What I'm doing here is I'm working closely with a collaborator who is working on the Indonesian palm oil supply chain. And we're looking at the first mile of the supply chain. So that's the farmers who grow the fruit, the transportation middlemen who transport their fruit, and then the processors who purchase their fruit.
Okay.
And so really think, rural Indonesia, people are driving around in trucks that are loaded up with oil palm fruit. And the question we're asking is, can we somehow improve the efficiency of this first mile? And so my collaborator does a really wonderful approach, I think, of working in this area. She does extensive field work together with experimental and theoretical work. So she has a field team out in Indonesia, and they've been, just integrating into the community, doing surveys with the farmers, collecting information. They did this for a year and a half before we even started to really do any research.
Can you give me a sense of the core challenges that even led her to fly to Indonesia and do the field work?
Yeah, so the challenges that led her to fly there were, a little bit more high level. Just she works in the sustainability space, so deforestation, and palm oil is deforestation for clearing for farmland, for farming oil palm fruit is quite a large cause of deforestation in a lot of rural areas. And so she wanted to figure out a way to improve the livelihoods of farmers so that they would not be incentivized to then go out and clear more land to farm for more fruit. So that's why she went there. But using her approach, she asked them, what did they want? What were the inefficiencies and pain points as they saw them? And so based on that, she learned that they really needed more help with transportation. So transportation, logistics, how to route given weather conditions is difficult. And they really needed more help just with more information about so every day, these processors are buying fruit from the farmers. Every day, they set a new price based on how the palm oil index is moving. And the farmers just have no idea what the prices are. And typically, in a lot of these informal supply chains, how you learn information is you have like an informal relationship. You've been selling a lot to this one processor, so they text you the price the night before. And so if you haven't been selling to other processors, you have no idea what the prices are anywhere else.
Right. And I could see you would worry that you're in a precarious position or that you might be getting taken advantage of.
You might worry from a market designer's perspective that we say that the processors have like the market power. Right. They have all the information, so they can set the monopoly price, which is the price that allows them to get the most profits. Great.
So what has been your contribution in this setting?
Yeah, so together with my collaborator, we're asking how can we improve information? How can we give the farmers more information about prices at other locations? And the approach that we've taken is to crowdsource information. It's not that nobody knows the information, it's just that everyone only knows a little bit of the information. So maybe if everyone pools their information, then everyone can know more. The issue here and why we really had to do some research is because everyone is competing with everyone else, right? These farmers are competing against each other. The transportation middlemen are competing against each other. And so how do you incentivize competitors to share information?
Right. I could imagine that if you were not careful, you could radically alter some dynamics that would cause a lot of emotions among the people whose livelihood you're affecting.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces there. There's definitely altering the balance of power between different farmers or middlemen. There are the more powerful ones and the smaller ones who are really the ones we're targeting, the ones who are just getting by. But then there's also the balance of power between the processors, which are purchasing the fruit, and the middlemen or the farmers, and who is able to obtain a bigger share of the pie. And so our goal here is to make sure that everyone is benefiting.
Mm-hmm.
The introduction of the platform is creating a larger pie and then splitting the pie so everyone gets a bigger piece than they had before.
And where are you in this implementation? We've talked in our previous discussions, you've mentioned that there is a lot of thought and simulation and policy and even engagement with community. I presume you have to do all of that in this context as well. And where are you towards the goal of the rolled out system that is functioning beautifully?
I don't know how far we are toward a system that is functioning beautifully and perfectly, but for the first step of just collecting the crowdsourced information and getting more information to the farmers, that's already happening on the platform. And it's been happening for a couple of years where we pay people to provide information. And so now what we're trying to do is move to a system where we don't have to pay people, where we can use non-monetary incentives.
So you mentioned that this farmer might have a privileged relationship with one of the transportation people. Are they perhaps, as part of your crowdsourced vision, sending out to the world, "Hey, I just got this much per pound or whatever for my palm oil fruit," and then that goes out and everybody says, "Oh, that's a better price than me," or "That's a worse price than me"? Is that the kind of thing you're doing?
Yeah, exactly. You hit it on the head. So what the app does is you can upload information. You can say, "I got this price at this buyer today." You can say, "Here was my experience." They take the fruit and they weigh it. So here was my experience in the weighing.
Right.
And there's other bits of information that you can input on the day. And when you input it, it gets aggregated into that buyer's information for the day.
So it sounds like at this stage, you have not, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have not yet applied your powerful algorithms to try to manipulate that market. It's more just gathering the initial data. But I wouldn't be surprised if you told me that once you have that set up, you have some ideas about how you can bring the power of your market-making approaches to actually help things. Is that a fair presumption?
Yes, that's exactly right. So what we're trying to do next is test some of our ideas for how to improve things for everyone while balancing the market. We want to test them in a field experiment. Okay. And so that's sort of been the ongoing work. It was slowed down a bit by the global pandemic.
Yes.
But that's definitely the next step.
How do people choose these kinds of problems? I'm sure you could also use your skills in the financial markets and make a lot of money. You're an academic, so that's already out the window maybe. But tell me about what is the ecosystem of these kinds of problems and how people identify them and apply teamwork to try to solve them?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think one that I hope more people can start asking in academia. And so my view is that because I'm an academic, I'm in this privileged position where I can work on what I want. And many of these partners that I'm working with, they don't have the resources to be able to, even think about these problems. So the school district, for example, they were panicked before we arrived. How are we ever going to solve this problem? We don't have enough people. We don't know how to think about it. And so what I do is I try to think about problems where there's real social need and where my knowledge and expertise can really be helpful and come in. This community is called Mechanism Design for Social Good. And so mechanism design is another way of talking about this market design set of tools that we've been describing today. And what this community asks is, well, it seems like historically a lot of mechanism design has focused on situations where there's a lot of money and funding. So how do we design ad auctions? What we're asking is, are there other problems where perhaps there are fewer resources and fewer opportunities for the partners to be working on this unless we come in?
Thanks for tuning into this episode. With over 250 episodes in our archives, you have instant access to an amazing array of discussions on a variety of topics. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to tell your friends, family, and colleagues about it so that we can grow the audience and grow the podcast. Personal recommendations are one of the best ways to spread the word. You can connect with me on X or Twitter at RB Altman, and you can connect with Stanford Engineering at Stanford ENG.